Adeptus Arbites Constabulary, later that day, Constable Dornstall rubbed his temple, then picked a parchment, dipped the quill, and began to write. Incident report. Murder. Date 2.311.35 M RST, reach sector time. Location, alleyway between Emperor's Way and Trinova Bridge. Wound analysis, single fatal wound, precise strike to the neck, severing spinal connection. Witness reports. Victim reportedly seen singing the same song as other victims. Medical observations. Subject exhibited signs of disease, boils, welts, and self-inflicted scratches indicative of severe irritation or fever. Investigative notes. See prior case files on this matter designated under Stalker of Trinova. Case status, ongoing investigation. Reporting officer, Constable Dornstall. Filed to Office of the Arbitrator and Lord Marshal of Trinova City, Grimness Hiveworld. Constable Dornstall rubbed his temple, then picked up a parchment. He dipped the quill, scratched a few lines, and paused to read it over. Incident report. Murder date 0231.35 RST, reach sector time. Trinova was the largest of the 9 hive cities on Grimness. Officially, it had no crime. That was true, depending on your viewpoint. All infractions, petty theft, bribery, riding the tram without a ticket, arriving late for shift, were penalized by wage deduction. A fixed fine for every sin. If a worker's earnings dropped to 0, they were marked non-productive. Without wages, they could no longer afford surface-level lodging. Those individuals were exiled to the Undercity, out of sight, out of registry. And if you weren't a citizen, then you couldn't legally commit a crime. The Undercity itself, officially empty. Just sewage lines, nutrient processing plants, and ancient storage vaults. No citizens, no records, no legal presence, and no victims. Any crimes committed down there, assuming they occurred at all, were not entered into the Imperial Ledger. They were not officially real. Reporting a crime required proof of existence, and the only punishment for the undocumented was servitor conversion. So Grimness was a low-crime world. And Trinova had almost no crime at all, except, in the past 6 months, there had been 9 murders. Not undocumented souls, not accidents, not data errors. 9 registered citizens killed by someone on the record. As a constable of the Arbits, Dornstall knew killings happened in the Undercity. They were an open secret. But murders on the surface? That was different. That left a mark. That required paperwork. He took out his tin flask, drained the last drop, and tucked it back into his tunic. Then he looked back down at the report. Sergeant Archibald Winthrop stepped into the office. Calling it an office was generous. Dornstall's desk sat in a half-walled cubicle along a main corridor. No door. Some partitions didn't even have ceilings. Dornstall was considered lucky. His workspace had a window, though it only looked out onto the plasteel flank of the barracks across the river. He never opened it. The air outside was worse than in, choked with industrial soot. Worse still was the noise, the thunder of wide-track constabulary carriers, grinding their way through the riverbed streets of the Taumad, their treads slapping through chemical sludge. Winthrop perched on the edge of the desk, shifting aside a pile of parchment with a knuckle. "Same as the others?" he asked without preamble, plucking the incident sheet from Dornstall's hand. Dornstall leaned back in his chair. "Same as the others." He reached absently for his flask, then remembered it was empty. Winthrop noticed. Without a word, he passed over his own. Standard issue. Nicknamed Lifesavers, the flasks were forged from Grimness tin, a dense alloy, the same used to line the macro cannons of the Imperial Navy. After each city block-sized cannon was cast, the leftover shavings were hammered into flasks and distributed to the constables. A tradition, a gift, a shield. Given that the armor issued to Arbite's constables could barely stop a sharpened spoon, let alone a bullet, the flasks were more useful than most issued gear. Some said they'd stop blades in riots. Others claimed that anything poured into one became instantly sterile, purged of all sin. That part was likely a lie. 3 killings, all with the same symptoms, all infected with something, Winthrop said, watching Dornstall drink. "Anything from the apothecaries?" Dornstall asked. The current theory was chemical contamination, an industrial agent introduced into the production line, causing neurodermal effects. If true, the more likely theory was someone had begun eliminating afflicted workers to stop the disease being noticed. Better to remove the sick than allow an Inquisition-baiting inspection. A factory halt, even for a minute, would be noted by Archmagos Senserax Centauri. And Centauri did not tolerate delays, not even those caused by dying workers. There was a soft tap at the doorway, or rather, at the space where a door would have been. Both men turned, and both men stood and saluted. The Adeptus Arbites, across the Imperium, carried a presence, a quiet authority of the Emperor that often intimidated suspects into confession without a word. Their appearance varied from world to world, but the effect was always the same. On Manifold Dawn, the Arbites wore black carapace, their ranks drawn from battle-hardened veterans with iron in their eyes. On NihtWyrtha, they wore chainmail and cloaks, eschewing shields in favor of movement. On Sarathar, a world of endless desert, the Arbites rode massive law dealers, armored bikes equipped with deployable cybermastiffs and mounted heavy weapons. And on Grimness, the constables wore long blue coats, helmets with integrated breathers, and carried shock mauls backed by bolters, or for more mundane duties, autopistols and leather caches. But whatever the garb, they shared the same air of absolute authority. In this case, though, they were outmatched. Standing in the open doorway was a short man, his frame heavily augmented, perhaps more so than many full magi. His refined robes marked him as a calculus logi, and his clasp bore the silver sunburst of a veteran from the Orc Wars, a conflict etched into the history of the Reach. But even he paled beside the woman. She stood well over 6 feet tall, clad in finely wrought Skitarii battleplate, reinforced with cataphractii-grade plating, the kind more commonly seen on Astartes Terminators. Slung across her back was a Serpenta-pattern rifle, gold and silver chased, with a wooden stock worn smooth by centuries of use. At her hip hung a dagger with a black blade, unmistakable in its design, Oceanus Orbi, M35281B, a relic from a world whose lethal close combat traditions were gaining notoriety across the Arcana Inclusium. Her Skitarii Alpha insignia was clear, but beneath it were identical veteran patches, and, more curiously, a Wigathan brooch. To the uninformed, it suggested a formal connection to the novice Astra Wigathan. In truth, it was a personal gift from the Hlaford of Silthdale. Not that either constable knew that. What unsettled them more was her eye. One eye, unaugmented, a rare thing for the Mechanicus. So deep a shade of blue it seemed to pulse, like the power core of a plasma lance battery moments before discharge. Sergeant Winthrop cleared his throat. "May I ask the reason for your presence?" His voice was measured, polite. These, he assumed, were the Mechanicus agents Dornstall had mentioned. As far as he knew, no other NihtWyrthan personnel of that rank were on Grimness. Alpha Braylon smiled faintly. Native women rarely went unveiled on Grimness. Between the smog and the chemical rains, gauze masks were tradition. Her uncovered face gave her words weight. They listened, out of respect, and maybe out of caution. After all, they were Arbites, but even they knew better than to ignore help freely offered. "If I make 3 statements," Braylon said, "and all are factual, then I believe we can assist in your investigation." Winthrop and Dornstall exchanged glances. Winthrop gestured, "Proceed." Braylon glanced to Phexion, then continued. 1, she held up a finger, all the victims exhibited symptoms of an illness. 2, all were killed in the same way, a single precise strike to the neck. 3, all were heard singing the same song before they died. She and Phexion had already run the data. Statistically, it was an anomaly. Illness among workers was common, yes, but if the symptoms were known, they'd have a name by now. And in the story of the lady, her followers bore signs, rings of the roads. Second, the execution method. 1 blow, surgical. This wasn't random violence, this was assassination. And third, the song. The first death had been reported as incoherent vocalization. The second, humming. The third, unusual oral statements. On Grimness, singing was rare. A grim silence followed. Dornstall exhaled and passed his tin flask back to Winthrop. "You have our attention." Phexion stepped forward. "So, what links the victims? Same manufactorum?" Winthrop shook his head. "No. First was a Gojman at the Arsenal manufactorum, macro cannon production. Second worked in the nutrient plant, listed as Cogitatus Courierium. Third was a scroll sorter at the Lexicon Relay Hub. All mundane roles," Dornstall added. "Barely a step above servitors. No vault access, no special skills." "And the malady?" Phexion asked. Dornstall looked to Winthrop, who handed him a copy of the apothecary's report. Phexion scanned it. Symptoms: rash, irritation, boil formation, no pathogen detected, no contagion, no microbial agent. He passed it back. So? Dornstall asked, "What's your link?" Phyrexian looked to Braylon. She stepped forward, folding her arms. Her augmetic eye clicked softly in the lumen light. "The song they sang," she said. "It's from a Wirthan ballad, The Mountain and the Lady, a folk tale from NihtWyrtha, my homeworld." Dornstall raised an eyebrow. "Anyone can pick up a song. Maybe it's popular among the underclass?" Braylon shook her head. "No, it's sung in Wirthan." She spoke a line aloud, "Beort beasen oop, ECG on hand," then translated, "with banners aloft and steel in her hand." They still looked blank. She sighed. "On NihtWyrtha, psychers are called seers. I trained at Holmbjorg before choosing the Mechanicus. That mountain is the same one from the story. Our world, after millennia of isolation, has a higher than normal psyker birth rate. That makes us vulnerable to warp incursions." Both men stiffened. Braylon continued, "The lady appears in many of our myths. She has names. The Dancer of the Endless Feast, the Eternal Lament. But in every version, her followers bear red marks, roses on the skin, and they sing." She let the silence stretch a moment, then delivered the shot. "Every iteration of these myths represents pre-imperial warp incursions. And on NihtWyrtha, when the lady returns, it means a daemon cult is already active." The room fell still. Winthrop and Dornstall exchanged glances, uncomfortable ones. Braylon kept her tone measured. "What you have here, gentlemen, is a daemon cult, and someone is covering it up." She folded her arms. "Which makes this investigation," she added, "with the closest inquisitor dead, our responsibility." Winthrop stared at her for a moment longer, then slowly nodded. "Then, on behalf of the city of Trinova and the Grimness Constabulary," he opened a drawer and pulled out 2 dull iron badges, stamped with the 8-pointed constabulary seal. "Welcome to the case." He tossed the badges across the desk. "Welcome to the Trinova Constabulary," he said with the tip of his cap.